Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. There's always stuff going on, right? There's always things kind of indicating that we are headed further and further down the path of destruction and collapse. But I've noticed that in the last couple of weeks, and it could be because, I said last night on a live stream, if you missed the live stream, it is still up on YouTube and Rumble. But I said last night that we seem to go through these cycles of, something big is happening. It's the end of the world, World War III. It's on the brink of it. It's in moments away from it. And that lasts for a few weeks. And then we go through a few weeks time period of kind of a lull. I mean, things are happening, most definitely, but it's not sensational enough that has everyone in fear that we're all going to die tomorrow. And then something will happen again and it'll pick back up. And we seem to be right now in one of those little lull periods with the Israel-Gaza war. It's still going on, and it's still devastating and destructive and awful, and all kinds of threats. Yemen, supposedly they seized an Israeli cargo vessel this morning, so there's certainly all kinds of stuff going on. But based on what I see with the people, it's not like we're going to die tomorrow, right? It's a little bit of a lull. People are starting to get used to the Israeli-Gaza things. All the daily moment-by-moment news reports have probably gotten most people so overwhelmed that, they get it, it's bad, but there's nothing they can do about it. So they kind of go into this little slumber state. And then, eventually something else will happen. So anyways, I've noticed, and again, this may just because we're kind of in that little lull. So it's one of the things that's trying to catch something, or maybe nothing. I don't know. But I've noticed in the last week or two, there's been a lot of talk about EMPs, electromagnetic pulses. Those seem to cycle through the news cycle every once in a while. But I will tell you that based on what's going on with us in China, and forget about this whole Biden meeting with Xi Jinping and stuff. It's all just for show. This kind of stuff happens all the time where two world leaders that are at great odds against each other, they meet, and it's like, oh yes, we would never go to war with each other. Oh, we just want to work out this peaceful blah, blah, blah. And then eventually later on, there is some kind of conflict. So I don't put a lot of meat into what happened between Biden and Xi Jinping. But the whole suspicion and possibility of an EMP, it's a real thing, as best as we can know. I mean, it's got to be one of the more perfect weapons to use against your adversary, especially for China. Because if an EMP is used, it's not that it's taking out people or really infrastructure like bridges and buildings and stuff like that. It's taking out electrical components that run everything. And the vast majority of electrical components that run everything, well, it comes from China. And what doesn't come from China comes from Taiwan. And, well, China would move in and take over Taiwan very quickly, too. So they would control all of the means to really get things back up and going if an EMP was used. And so I see that as almost a perfect weapon of war, at least right now, because you don't have massive casualties that in destruction of the infrastructure that they'd want. You just use an EMP, you set back, you wait a year or so, and let the population die off, and then you move in, and everything's pretty much there, right? I know it's not exactly that way, but it's pretty similar. The estimates are that if an EMP is used, a big or multiple EMPs are used on the United States, we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 90% death toll within the first year, because people can't live without electricity apparently anymore. So anyways, I'm not on here with this video trying to give you some updates on the latest threat of an EMP, but just to remind you that it is out there, and to ask the question of how ready are you? Much like back in the Cold War, the big threat was nuclear. And of course, that still is a threat. I mean, nuclear still is a threat. And in a sense,, that's what an EMP is anyways. It's a high altitude explosion of a nuke. But we wouldn't have the radiation and all that kind of stuff, the fallout. It would just be knocking out the electrical. And I know I'm very much oversimplifying things, but it's a 10-15 minute video, folks. But are we ready for that? Are you ready for that? That's the big thing. I know that there's speculation of how much the U.S. government's equipment is hardened and how much it isn't, depending on the size of the, EMP that was used. And I'm not really interested in getting to that, because all that matters to me is how ready are you for that? You have to understand that if an EMP is detonated, multiple EMPs are detonated, and it all gets taken out, it's not just that there's no electricity to run anything. It's that a lot of the things that you have that run on electricity will never function again. It cooks them, it fries them. So all of your appliances or your, your little solar battery generator thingies and your cell phones and possibly radios and other things like that, it's not just that the grid's down, so I just pop out the solar panel and charge it. It may not work ever again. It could just completely fry the components in it. So it's not about being a lack of electricity. It's that all the electrical components are done. It could melt wiring, inside of components or even in your home, depending on the severity of it. There's all sorts of possibilities that could happen. And so I guess the big question is how ready are you for that? Because it's got to be one of the most ultimate levels of destruction. I mean, it's certainly up there with a coronal mass ejection, with a massive, caldera volcanic eruption. It's up there, because even a nuke, as bad as a nuke is, most nukes, even big nukes, could barely take out a whole city, a big city. Let's say St. Louis or Kansas City or Chicago or Denver, Colorado, something like that. It would take, most nukes couldn't take out the entire city. I mean, they may make the city unlivable, but it's just a city is what typically a nuke would take out. Whereas EMPs, we're talking the entire country potentially with just a few detonations. So it's much bigger. It's much more destructive. It's maybe not as immediate. You don't have people falling over dead and turning into ash within moments. But in the long run, it's way, way, way more destructive than a nuclear weapon, ground level nuclear weapon strike. And we have to think about this. We have to be prepared for it, because in the age of the higher technology warfare that we've gotten ourselves into, it's certainly, in fact, as militaries become more technological, I think the threat of an EMP becomes greater, because if you look at militaries 30, 40, 50 years ago, an EMP would only affect them so much. But when we see now our militaries and most of the world's is trying to become hyper technological, an EMP would completely shut down the military. Nothing would function. It would just stop working. It would be literally throwing us back to the Stone Age, and which is what a lot of people say. And so we have to start thinking about that. Can you live? It's not living off grid. A lot of us, a lot of you live off grid and stuff. It's not about living off grid, because off grid indicates that you're producing your own electricity somehow. It's living in a world without it. It's living in a world without communications, without electricity, without any kind of power. You can't, whatever fuel that you have in your tanks and stuff is it, and the things that fuel is for may not work anymore. Your car may not function. Your generator may not function, depending on how it's made. A lot of things may not function, and then you're not going to get any refuel supply. You're not going to go down to the gas station and get some more, or have more propane delivered. It's done at that point. And so this is a very extreme situation, and I think it's overwhelming for a lot of people. Maybe you're new to prepping, you're just kind of getting started, or you're not quite at that advanced level where you're really planning for like the end of the world apocalypse kind of thing. And so when you start to think about an EMP, of what it could actually do and how bad it is, it's so overwhelming, and it causes you to kind of go into a freezing fear, panic kind of mode, and you just can't handle it, so you don't think about it. So you're focused more on, natural disaster prepping, mad rushes to the grocery store kind of prepping, that kind of stuff. And so a lot of people, I think they tend to just convince themselves that an EMP is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We're not going to have an EMP. And so I shouldn't even prepare for it. But I'm telling you, I would say that there's a growing likelihood, let's put it that way, that some type of EMP could be used. And I want to strongly encourage you to be preparing for that. Here's my deal with putting stuff in like secure Faraday cages. Yes, it's great, but if the whole world is fried for the most part, does it really matter? If you're putting your little $20 Baofeng radios in a Faraday cage so they don't get fried, how many other people are doing that? And if not very many other people are doing that, you're not going to be able to communicate with them. Cell phones is ridiculous because it's part of a network. It's going to get fried and you're not going to be able to use them. Do I put some things in stuff like that? Yes, but honestly, it's not a high priority for me. Partly because I've read that some of these very powerful EMPs, these very powerful nukes that could produce EMPs, that the frequencies are so powerful that most Faraday cages would not be sufficient. So that's honestly not a high priority for me. The high priority for me when looking at EMP preparation is how can I just learn to live without it? What can I do in my life that I don't need all of this technology? We have to realize that technology, electricity, not even modern technology, virtually all electronic type technology has only been around for the most part for about a century. It wasn't that long ago that people, the average person, and I said average, the average person or average little farm had no technology, no modern, no electricity, nothing. They didn't have power coming into their home. They didn't have refrigeration. They didn't have lights. They didn't have power tools. They didn't have any of that kind of stuff. We're not that far set apart from that. And so it shouldn't take us that long to get back to that place if we had to. And so really what I do is I try to think of what could we do if there was no technology, no power, how can we survive? And I think if you start from that point, which I get it is extreme, then everything else after that starts to look pretty easy. Yes, we do have things put away that, we could pull out some solar panels and stuff and maybe stuff works, maybe, who knows? But if not, our at the end contingency plan is to exist without the power. That's not easy. The first big thing that most people think of is food preservation. Well, food preservation was done long before the refrigeration. People would put things in creeks like this. People would bury it under their home, under the ground, in the root cellars and stuff like that. They would preserve their food differently so they didn't need refrigeration. Refrigeration is very much a modern convenience, and we can get around that if we work at it. Now, I know that someone sent me an email, and it doesn't directly address this, but kind of. He was saying that the things that I propose of getting out of the city and learning to live very simply might be great for some, but the vast majority of people can't do that, won't do that. They're not going to leave the city. They're not going to go off and homestead, and have kind of a primitive backup. And this idea that the only way to survive is to do that is preposterous, because what about all these people in the city? Well, I'm not saying that they won't survive. There's going to be a lot of people that won't survive in the cities because of that. But especially if you took an EMP, the big cities are going to be like big zombie fields within 3 to 5 days if an EMP hits. And that's just the facts. But can you survive? Yes. Is it going to be pleasant? No. It's going to probably look much like what you've seen in videos and in historical footages and maybe your own memory of Bosnia back in the war that happened there in the 80s and 90s, Venezuela, other places where it's like all of society completely collapsed and people almost became animals again. That's what you're going to see in the big cities. So is it survivable? Yeah, it's survivable, but it's hard. You got to know what you're doing. You got to be really tough, but it's survivable. What about out here? Is it survivable out here? I think it's more survivable. It's not going to be, nice walks in, in the flower fields and stuff all the time. It's going to be hard. But the less people just automatically makes it less dangerous. It's still dangerous, just less dangerous. So can you survive living in the city? Yes. Should you still try to pursue to get out of it? Sure, absolutely. I'm surrounded by people all over this area that they have walked away from big homes and big jobs and fancy cars and all this kind of stuff to live in a small little tiny cabin. No joke whatsoever. Live in a tent, live in a little RV while they can build a little cabin. And they're doing it not because, they want to punish themselves from living in their, $1 million home or $500,000 home. They do it because they know it's much more survivable. And so a lot of it is just dedication. And I know that hurts a lot of people's feelings because they're like, oh, you're saying that I'm not serious enough? Well, maybe that is what I'm saying. I don't know. I'm not here to coddle people. I'm here to push you to do a little bit more in your preparations. And if you don't, it's on you. No one's going to force you to do it. But I'm just telling you, once you start to realize because of circumstances that you should have done these things, it's too late. It's too late at that point. So you need to be getting your houses in order. Yes, an EMP, coronal mass ejections, CMEs, volcanic eruptions, all these things are happening at a, or becoming more and more likely because of just the way things are going in the world, the way the earth is changing. And so you need to be preparing for that, taking it serious and doing the very best that you can to get out and away from the places that will become much more dangerous. You need to be getting your houses in order and preparing yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.